Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are going to be taking a look at the topic of the auction house inside Path of Exile, or rather the lack thereof of an auction house inside Path of Exile. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, and click the bell to get future conversations like this one notified directly to you. So today our table of contents are as follows. First off, we're going to talk about why do so many people want an auction house. And I mean, there's a ton of people that want an auction house. This is not an insignificant number of players. It is not an insignificant percentage of players. This is indeed a great debate to have, not simply because it's a fun debate. I don't just mean great as in enjoyable. I also mean great as in numerical. There's a lot of people that are lined up on either sides of this issue's pro or con for an auction house. So we're going to take a look at why do some people want one. Then we're going to take a look at what would the theoretical benefits of an auction house look like. What would some of the pros be if there was an auction house that was added into the game of Path of Exile? Then we're going to take a look at a couple of suggestions of implementations of an auction house. There's a bunch of different people that have come up with a bunch of different great ideas. A lot of them come from other games or from other real-life examples that players and users have come up with. So we're going to take a look at a couple of those. Then we're going to ask the question, why hasn't Grinding Gear Games added an auction house to the game yet? If there's all these wonderful reasons and all these wonderful suggestions and methods for adding an auction house, why isn't it here yet? Then we're going to transition and really move the conversation forward, hopefully, to actually move the conversation beyond simply screeching at one another. Rah, auction house, pro auction house, yay, or boo, no auction house, keep it the way it is. So hopefully we're going to move the discussion beyond simply screeching at one another. Oh, Iron, I think there ought to be an auction house. Oh, Iron, I don't think there should be. We're going to try and move beyond that today into a little bit more articulate of conversation. Then we're going to move on to some wild assertions from the present context of PoE about what an auction house might do to the environment of PoE and why maybe having an auction house might be good and maybe not having an auction house might be good for PoE. Then, of course, we're going to wrap up with some discussion questions for you, the G3 community. You are always, of course, welcome to leave a comment down below with any feedback, ideas, or assertions, wild assertions of your own about the auction house. I always love reading your comments and enjoy engaging in debate and discussion with all of you. So, why do some want an auction house in Path of Exile? Well, first off, trading with other players can be frustrating. This is one of the top reasons that I saw in my search of the forums and in my search of various other platforms that players use, such as Reddit, such as in-game chat, such as Discord, just in chatting with other players and interacting with folks, as well as doing some in-depth research using the forums. Why is it for years, dating back at least the earliest thread that I looked at, not the earliest one that I found, but the earliest one that I looked at was dating back to 2014, where people were clamoring for an auction house. And a lot of player comments around this topic have been that trading with other players can be frustrating. It can be frustrating for numerous reasons. One, sometimes people are AFK, and you've probably tried to trade maps in Path of Exile. You've probably tried to trade currency with people in Path of Exile, and it's incredibly frustrating to go into a scenario where you are hoping to come out on the other side with a successful trade. So you message somebody, and sure enough, you wait and you wait and you wait, and nothing happens. Or maybe you're a more experienced trader, and you know a lot of people that are listing their goods are going to be AFK. So you spam a whole bunch of people, and then it's even more depressing when none of those whole bunch of people respond to you because they're all AFK or price fixing, as it were. So trading with other players can be frustrating because of AFK traders. Trading with other players can also be frustrating because there's just no response from players who are engaged in content. So right now, the way how Path of Exile is set up, if you are engaged in the labyrinth, you are actively pulling yourself away from availability in making trades. That's just a bummer across the board. If somebody messages you for a trade and you're in lab, chances are they're not going to wait for you to get out of lab for the trade. There will be some specific examples, and I'm sure all of us have had exceptions to that. But for the most part, if somebody's in lab, if somebody's mapping and they're in a max party, if there's 6 people in a party, that can be frustrating to lose that spot. If they're in a rotation, if they're simply leveling a character and they're in a groove, if they're in the middle of a boss fight and they forgot to go D&D, there's lots of reasons why somebody might not respond to a trade request, and that's frustrating. Another reason why players want an auction house is because slow load times of hideouts. This has been a problem that has grown, not gone down, but rather grown with the number of hideouts that are now available that we can find throughout the game. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I am not particularly complaining of all of these particular things. I'm simply citing different complaints that I've seen other people make. So for many people, the new hideouts and the various level of decorations that people are now putting into their hideouts, because hideouts carry over from league to standard and from standard to league and from league to league, and you can change the different tile sets and have different preset tile sets. Different people's computers can handle different hideouts differently. So the very fact that sometimes some people throughout the league, and this has been seriously reported for a couple of leagues now, even before all of the new hideout changes, some people will simply crash when they're entering into somebody else's hideout to make a trade. And so because the norm is that the trader stays in their hideout and the tradee moves to the new hideout, sometimes those slow load times or even crashes where you lose your party can be frustrating. It's a pain in the butt. Also, trading with other players can be tedious. Not only is it frustrating to actually get into somebody's hideout and actually message somebody who's actually there, but then when you're actually interacting with another human being, sometimes that can be tedious. So multiple players in a party can mean you essentially have to wait in line, or you've got a queuing up style of approach to trading. I know oftentimes when people are interacting, especially with currency traders, if a currency trader has a really close margin for profit, then that means that they're very, very busy as they're interacting with a lot of people. And sometimes it can be tough. Sometimes you can get left out. Sometimes you can feel like you're getting left out. Sometimes you can look and see a whole trade party fill up and then just subside, and you're just sitting there like, wait, we never made the trade. So trading with other players can be tedious, and it can mean that you're sitting there waiting for a trade and not playing the game. Splitting currency into particular stacks or sizes can actually slow down an otherwise very speed-oriented and smooth game. So many of us are enjoying and engaging with the actual in-game content where we are fighting monsters, killing monsters, and progressing, leveling up our characters and going towards our goals. And splitting currency into stacks, moving items around, making sure that you're grabbing the right item, making sure that it's got the particular rolls that the person wanted on there. That's all stuff that slows you down. It's stuff that makes trading tedious rather than speedy. It's stuff that makes the entire process boring rather than action-oriented and fun. Thirdly, differentiating between price fixers and real sellers slows everything down. So oftentimes when you are looking at a good, whether that's a currency or even an item, a map, it doesn't matter what it is, a gem, as soon as you start to look on a trade website for a particular listing of something, you've got to ask yourself, is this a real seller, or is this a price fixer, or is this just somebody that's AFK and they've got an old price up and they're going to reprice it? That's really, really tedious. And it gets even more tedious if you're interacting with somebody and they start haggling with you. So this, again, is not a personal complaint. I enjoy interacting with people and negotiating on prices, but not everybody enjoys that. So there's a lot of folks that see this very, very tedious process of actually interacting with other people, slowing down the process of trading, which slows down you getting the thing that you want, which slows down your time to get back into the game that you actually want to play. Trading with other players slows down your character progression. So slower trades means more time trading and less time actually going out and killing monsters and killing bosses and leveling up your character, getting ascendancy points, getting passive points, finding loot. I've never found awesome loot while I'm trading in somebody else's hideout. I just haven't, because the game's not designed that way. So slower trades means more time trading and less time actually playing and enjoying Path of Exile, the game where we're killing monsters and progressing our characters. Slowing down character progression also means precious time lost rushing to a particular level. So a lot of players, especially nowadays with the prevalence of YouTube and with the prevalence of Twitch, a lot of players really focus on efficiency as they're playing Path of Exile, because we're all min-maxers to varying levels and varying degrees, but we're all min-maxers as we want to get the best bang for our buck, or another way of saying it is that we want to get the most amount of value out of the decisions that we're offered in a game. So when we're offered a decision to get to a particular goal, like a certain level or progressing through the axe at a certain speed, and there's something that comes up that's a challenge to that goal, and that challenge is trading, Having slower trades means you're getting to your level or to your end of your acts or to whatever goal it is that you've set for yourself for that play session. It means you're getting there slower, unless your goal for that play session was to make a certain number of trades. And even then, having slower trades means that the overall number of trades that you can do is actually slower. So trading with other players just slows everything down. Thirdly, slower trades makes for less trading in the long run. Some players want to trade more. So when we're talking about min-maxing and playing Bank of Exile, which again, I am a fan of, I love doing it, nonetheless, a lot of players don't, and even those players that enjoy playing Bank of Exile and trading would certainly appreciate having the facilities and a mediator in between them that would allow them to make more trades at a faster rate and therefore min-max their profits to an even greater extent. So slower trades makes for less overall trades, which for people who enjoy trading, it's even more of a bummer. So what would the theoretical benefits of an auction house be? What would it actually look like? Well, people have come up with supposed perfect world scenarios across the board. And I wanted to just reference a couple of forum posts because I thought they were great on this topic. So first off, this is a user who says, why is there no auction house? It's same trade system we have now, but even more systematic, no ripping off of anyone, and faster trading process. This other user, this is great, a wonderful, beautiful Gabe meme. Gaben, if you hear me, don't ever let the auction house into this game. We need to scam more for the greater good. Lol, smite down the fiends that want it. In other words, making this sarcastic comment like, hey, we should never have an auction house because it allows us to scam more people. And by the way, this person that posted this, look at all of the support packs. I mean, this is not somebody that just picked up the game and started playing free to play the other day. This is another user that says, GGG, you guys created a trading website. Why not just put auction house in the game? PoE uses different currencies and not real money. It will never ruin the game. Trading sites does. I think they mean trading sites do. No response from whispers. It is BS, honestly. AH Auction House is newbie friendly. Maybe let players use the auction house after finishing Act 8. I know you guys listen. It is 2019. Time to attract new players. Only greedy old players benefit from trading sites. And this beautiful response. We have this thread every day. So, what are the supposed benefits to all this? Everybody's up in arms about an auction house. Well, supposedly, there are some benefits to having an auction house, and you've seen what some of the proposed benefits are there. One, it's going to make trade less frustrating, right? Simply across the board, trade is frustrating right now, and having an auction house would make it less frustrating. Secondly, it would make trade much speedier. Part of the reason why trade is such a bummer right now is because it's so tedious. So if we have an auction house, it gets faster, it's less frustrating, benefits for everybody. Then thirdly, it makes character progression faster. Hey, we all want to get to the goals that we've got for our characters, whether that's a certain level, whether that's a certain progress goal for a particular type of content that we're trying to conquer. Having speedier trades in a perfect world scenario with an auction house makes character progression faster, easier, and therefore, in the minds of some, better. Okay, well, some have suggested variations of an auction house and have actually gone on to further the conversation and say, okay, so if we're going to have an auction house, if GGG in theory put together an auction house, what would that actually look like? Well, a couple of different suggestions that often get made, and so I'm fully anticipating many of you to comment down below with your own suggestions of auction house, and I look forward to listening to them. I look forward to hearing them and interacting with them. The reality is that a bunch of different games use auction houses, and so a lot of people have suggested, hey, just do it like other games. You can insert whatever your favorite title is that uses an auction house for a lot of folks to argue, hey, do it like this game. I've heard very, very niche games that I've gone and looked at and seen that they have a total player count of less than 30,000 suggested. And then I've seen others suggest games as massive and as big as the biggest ones out there made by AAA developers that have got massive, massive auction houses at their disposal. So there's a wide variety of suggestions that are made that just say, hey, there's other games that already do auction houses. Why don't we have one in PoE? Let's just do it like other games. Can't we just copy an already pre-existing system, or at least base our system off of a good system that's already in place? Secondly, other folks have seen that there might be some reason not to do a full-fledged auction house, and so they kind of hedge their bets. They say, okay, well, let's do an auction house, but we're only going to do it for, we're only going to do it for maps, okay? We're only going to have an auction house for maps because we don't want to impact currency. We don't want to impact the rest of items. We just want this to be more of an end game thing, so if you're new to the game, you don't have to worry so much about the auction house. We just want to do the auction house for maps, and then the rest of everything else in the game can be handled as is now in the slow, tedious, and delaying character progression method that exists right now in Path of Exile. Others say, well, we don't want to do it for maps. We'll just do it for currency. We don't want to slow down items or mapping. But currency, oh, it's so tedious to flip currency and to sit there and to interact with somebody else. Oh, is this the right number of currency that I'm trading? Is this a good ratio? Oh, figuring out those ratios and putting them on websites and trying to trade currency. Oh, it's so frustrating, man. Oh, just an auction house just for currency. If we could just have it for currency is some of the suggestions. Thirdly, could we just have just an auction house just for unique items, just where you could go in and just interact with unique items? We don't want it to touch rare items because for some reason, those who make this argument, for some reason, having an auction house for unique items, because unique items are often so common, whereas rare items are like the top end of gear, at least in their top and most best rolled versions of themselves. Oh, well, we just want them to be for unique items because unique items are the things that are build enabling. And so many different characters and so many different people have a high demand for those unique items, which are often very low value in their trade per item, since so many different build enabling uniques are very low value in and of themselves, depending on their roles. Why don't we just have an auction house just for those unique items, just for players who are getting new to the game and maybe they found a build guide and they're just trying to find that unique that they can copy their build on. Yeah, come on, it would really help the new players out. That's oftentimes the argument. And thirdly, some have argued for an auction house or at least some kind of improvements, quality of life suggestions to trading. So some of those suggestions that I've seen around the internet have been stackable currency in the window, which of course no scammers out there would ever take advantage of the fact if you could actually interact with items once they're in the trade window. No one would ever take advantage of that, right? You should totally go watch our video on Don't Get Scammed. But anyway, that's one suggestion, is to be able to make it so that way you don't have to cancel a trade if you've put in a certain number of currency or a certain quantity of currency, that you'd be able to swap that out while it's in the window. Totally couldn't see that going wrong. Anyway, some have argued for quality life suggestions like adjusting character items while you're in the trade. So not just currency while you're in the window, but items themselves, which, by the way, again, did you hear what I just said? Go watch our video on Don't Get Scammed. Literally, there's a bunch of different scams out there that are predicated on the ability to simply quickly swap items out of a trade window. Adjusting and allowing characters to interact with stuff that would be in the trade window would just be a headache, and it would actually end up getting a lot more people scammed. In my humble opinion, I could totally be wrong. Thirdly, AFK trading options. Hey, a lot of people leave Path of Exile up while they're AFK, while they're at work, while they're away, while they're spending family time, while they're putting their kids to bed. Yes, I do that a lot where I leave it open, so I'm sorry if I didn't message you back, whoever you are, when you were asking for that Barrows map. I'm so sorry, Barrows map. Anyway, AFK trading options. If you're AFK, what if we could just have like an NPC that was available in your hideout? This is a very often very popular suggestion. Maybe you just have like Helena or Nico or, Navali, anybody, just sit in your hideout and somebody can just come travel to your hideout and they can interact with your stash and interact with what you've sold things or listed things for via this AFK trading sort of option. And maybe it would only be available once you're set to AFK. So it wouldn't be available for an everyday sort of thing. It wouldn't be a full-fledged auction house. Maybe we could just do that as a quality of life improvement to trading in Path of Exile. Well, there's also the complaint, of course, about price fixers on websites. Oh, man, could we at least somehow change this? Could GGG just step in and put some policies down or maybe stop somebody from listing 1,000 maps all at the incredibly low price of the wrong price of one wisdom scroll, when in reality the price of the map is much more than that. Oh, can we just have, maybe we could tweak the websites, maybe we could tweak the API, maybe there's some suggestions here. And I've seen some legitimate suggestions. I know I'm being very sarcastic here as we're talking about this, but there are some really legitimate good suggestions out there for improving trade. And I wanted to lay this out for our discussion, so that way, hopefully, I wasn't straw manning too much to say, look, there are good reasons for an auction house. There are absolutely valid complaints and valid reasons why we all, as a community involved in Path of Exile, feel like trade is tedious. We feel like trade can be cumbersome, and we feel like trade slows down our character progression. There are legitimate observations by the Path of Exile community. But guess what? Why hasn't GGG added an auction house? If I was to sum it up in a single sentence, it's because those three things, slowing down character progression, making trade a little bit more tedious, and making trade frustrating, are actually goals that Grinding Gear Games has for trade. That's like the big twist. If you were waiting for the big twist, maybe I'll put that, in the timestamps. The big twist. That's the big twist. Is Grinding Gear Games actually wants trade to be this way? So first off, easy trade reduces the number of times a character improves their items. And this, by the way, is all taken, all four of these points that I'm about to make is all taken from this trade manifesto. And of course, as always, everything is linked down below in the video description. So if you want to read this trade manifesto, posted by Chris in 2017. You can go and read all of the wonderful, beautiful, well thought out, well reasoned details of why it is that Grinding Gear Games has the policies that they have. First off, the first point that Chris makes is easy trade reduces the number of times a character improves their items. That's a bad thing. From GGG's perspective, that's actually a bad thing. The second reason is that easy trade actually means reducing drop rates. Ultimately, that's what it means. It means that as players have easier access to acquiring their items through trade, it means that they're not going to be looking for things to drop through drop rate. And that means that GGG actually has to account for the ease of acquiring an item, not simply from the basic drop rate of an item, but then they also have to factor into it the economic considerations, which means right now GGG doesn't balance drop rates, at least as of this particular post, unless there's been a change in their mindset. They don't adjust drop rates based on us as a player base determining what we value and what we don't value. If that changes, if there is an auction house, it would mean easier trading, which would mean they would have to adjust drop rates based on player economic movement of what's popular and what's not. Thirdly, easy trade would make the disparity between different players too great. So the team at GGG is very, very worried about creating a power gap and a wealth gap between casual commoners, that's what we're going to call them, at the bottom end of the rung, and I would throw myself into that, versus the ultra wealthy, right? People who can simply buy whatever it is that they want to buy. They craft whatever it is that they want to craft because they've already got the currency that they want, that they need, and frankly, more currency than they could ever want or really use or need. But easy trade would actually further the gap in that scenario. And there's a number of reasons why this is the way it is and why this theory is so prevalent amongst the staff at GGG. You can take exception to their argument. You can say, no, it wouldn't happen that way. I'm simply presenting to you right now why it is that GGG is arguing that they won't add an auction house. These are the reasons why. It's because easier trade would, in their minds, create a greater gap in between the wealthy and the casual commoner. Then the fourth reason is that easy trade allows for greater abuse by automation. So it is no secret that Grinding Gear Games fights against bots. It's no secret that there are ban waves every single league. There's no secret that there are regular ban waves and regular bot hunting that goes on. That being said, if you add an auction house, and I've heard this from many of you who've left me comments about different games and how you all as communities, whether it's yourself or your friends that you've known in guild or in various communities you've been a part of, you know people who have botted and you know people who have interacted with auction houses and have set up bots particularly to interact and be able to both proactively engage a market and reactively respond to changes in the market in such a fashion that a bot can do that 24/7 that a player cannot. And so that changes the reality of the economy. It changes all sorts of expectations in the economy. It changes all sorts of issues regarding supply and demand. Easy trade allows for greater amounts of abuse by automation. And again, there's the link. It's going to be provided down below if you want to read that great thread from Chris. It at least presents to you a case for why it is that there is no auction house right now, even though we've all got these great ideas about why an auction house would be an improvement. And so we come to really the crux of the debate. Isn't faster progression good? Right? We said that one of the things that an auction house would improve is faster trades leads to faster progression. And Grinding Gear Games has just told us, Chris Wilson, the lead developer, has just told us, hey, we want trade to be slow and tedious because we want to slow down your character progression. It's not a good thing to have too fast of a character progress. Well, isn't character progression good? Simple answer is no, because of player retention. I'll say that loudly and clearly. No, because it hurts player retention. All right? So you might be saying at this point, oh, but Iron, just because, Grinding Gear makes a decision doesn't mean it's a good decision for player retention. Not everything that they say is right. And you'd be right on that, okay? But there's some caveats here. If you don't think that faster progression changes the numbers on player retention, that's fine. I'm totally fine with you dropping that comment. I'm totally fine with you having that opinion. But please, please, please substantiate it with some evidence, okay? It's financially and professionally beneficial for Grinding Gear to have the most amount of players playing the most amount of time possible. It is an incentive for them to do that. So it doesn't mean that Grinding Gear is always going to make the best decision regarding player retention. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be perfect on that. However, it does mean they're incentivized to be perfect in that. It does mean that. So the onus is on the conspiracy theorist here, or on us as players that are disputing this. The onus is on us to prove that Grinding Gear Games is going against their own benefit by elongating each player's retention cycle. So if you didn't follow me there, to put it in a succinct nutshell, if you think that Grinding Gear Games is going against their own self-interests and is actually harming player retention by not providing an auction house, the onus is on you to show that, because Grinding Gear Games is actually arguing that an auction house would hurt player retention. Oh, but Iron, I just wish I could play a whole bunch of characters, and I don't have the currency because trading is such a hassle. Okay, I'm going to get very, very short and very, very angry with you very, very quickly if you make this argument. Here's my response to that. False. And if I had the Dwight Schrute meme, I would just throw it up on the screen right here. You don't have the currency because you have not yet mastered the already present, available, in-game ways of making currency in PoE to achieve your own currency goals. That's why you don't have enough currency. Okay? If you want to learn how to make some more currency, there's tons of different videos out there, not just my own, tons of other people that create content every single day on Twitch, on YouTube, both on this channel and on other channels, as well as other platforms. Okay, so just because you don't have enough currency for your particular goals doesn't mean that the entire system needs to change simply because you don't have enough currency to meet your goals. It might mean that you need to change the way how you're doing things a little bit, because there are going to be opportunities for you to actually reach your goals if you take advantage of the opportunities and the available, already present options in game for generating the currency for you to achieve those goals. So faster progression is not always a good thing. Well, a few examples of slower progression actually being a healthier thing. Some of these are going to be personal examples, and if you want to critique me and say, Iron, those are just personal, those are just circumstantial, they're not wide sweeping at all, that's totally fine. Hit me with that accusation. I'm going to give you a couple of these, and I think they are symptomatic of what many different players actually experience as they progress too fastly or once they reach their particular goal. So the first example of this was the first headhunter that I ever acquired. So for a league, I made it my goal to acquire a headhunter. I grinded, I traded, I learned the market, and I played several different characters to around character level 80 until I was really comfortable with a particular character to farm and to grind. And then I simply went out and made enough currency to get my headhunter. And within 72 hours, about 3 days of getting my headhunter, I stopped playing PoE for the league. I stopped. That was my goal that league. That was where I was going to be happy with my progress for the league. And so the faster I got to that goal, the sooner I was going to stop playing Path of Exile. So is that a good thing? Maybe that's a good thing for my personal health. Maybe it's a good thing for, the health of other games that I enjoy and that I play. But from PoE's perspective, me getting to that headhunter faster, if that headhunter was my goal for the league, If I would have gotten there faster, I would have stopped playing sooner. So from grinding gear games perspective, that's not a good thing. Secondly, Shaper. So a boss killing example. Same thing. For a league, I made it my goal to kill the Shaper. I played different characters till I settled on a build that I felt comfortable to beat Shaper with. And then, sure enough, within about 72 hours, 3 days of finally beating Shaper, I stopped playing PoE for that league. I dabbled with like a character here or there, but I was like, well, I've already killed Shaper. I guess next league I'll try a different goal. Now, does that mean that every single player is like me? No, it doesn't. But I think these are symptoms or symptomatic of many of us as players, that once we set a goal for ourselves, whatever that goal is, once we reach it, oftentimes we're done at that point in engaging and pursuing the content that the game's got to offer us. So if that is the case, then the old proverb or the old saying that, you know, the reason why it's the journey and not the destination that matters is articulated and shown and really given to us as an example right here with these concepts, that so much of our gameplay is driven by, and our enjoyment of games is driven by, our journey, not the destination. That's not true for all of us, but I think that'll be true for at least some of us. Third example from a game that's not PoE, so World of Warcraft. I played WoW for a single expansion. I had heard so much about it while I was still professionally involved in gaming and game consultation and working with a couple of different clients. I played WoW because I had heard so much about it. I realized I need to experience what this WoW stuff is all about to be able to speak some of the lingo of some of these clients. And sure enough, I learned the game from a max level characters perspective, because at that time with that particular expansion you got a max level character that you could play with, and that was really, really fun. That max level character allowed me to interact with my other guildmates and with my other clients that I was trying to interact with at the time and learn the game with. It allowed me to learn the game from a max level character's perspective, which was good professionally because I got to interact and keep up with those people at that level. However, it was actually bad in the long run, because everything prior to end game raiding or grinding felt like I was missing out. So whenever I went to level up another character, I felt like I wasn't actually playing the game that everybody else was talking about. I felt like I was getting to or progressing or doing my homework to eventually get to the game that I wanted to play that everybody else was talking about. So I quit WoW because I never spent the time needed to develop an affection for the game itself prior to reaching the end game. My progression was too fast and it cheapened my experience. I genuinely think that I would be playing World of Warcraft today and not Path of Exile if I didn't have an end game character available to me and I had to grind and enjoy the grind to get to that end game character. I think that was a big mistake on my own part. Not blaming Blizzard, not blaming anybody else out there. I'm simply talking about my own personal experience here. I blame that personal quitting of that game and lack of enjoyment on the fact that I just got there to the end game, to my goal, to what everybody else was talking about too quickly. So slow progression can actually be a good thing. It can actually help us enjoy games. Okay, well, you might not believe me yet, so a few more examples of slow progression. Well, a lot of us like to feel growth in our characters. So imagine this. Maybe you can relate with this experience. You're a player that wants to emotively feel, you want to notice, you want to experience character progression in your Path of Exile character. You want to feel what it's like when you get an item upgrade. You want to notice when you apply a new passive on the tree. You want to be able to mark what sorts of zones you're able to run through, how quickly you're able to complete them, and what sort of challenging content you're able to overcome. You want to feel that experience of your character progressing and growing. And the sweet spot for players like this is usually right after their first ascendancy. Not all of us. So if you don't fit this exact mold, that's fine. But for a lot of players, right after their first ascendancy, they have a more motivated play session directly after that to experience all of the new gems that they get. There's a lot of quest gems that unlock after Act 3, particularly with Siosa in the library. All of the new currency, Exalted start dropping in the mid-30s. Items and passives that are all available at that part in the game. A lot of the times you're getting to a couple of keystone passives on the tree at around Act 3, Act 4, where your character starts to feel a little bit more fleshed out. You've got your first ascendancy. So you feel more empowered. You've got uniques that are allowing you to do things that your character previously simply couldn't. This player quits playing and moves on to another character or to another game when they feel like they've hit a wall or the challenge they're facing isn't accompanied with the desired levels of felt progression. So, if you go really, really fast as you're playing, if you're this sort of player, then you hit that wall faster, and that means that you jump onto another character or to another game faster. So slowing down your progression can actually be healthy for players that like to feel growth. This next point of having progression be slow is what I like to call the legacy items are stupid argument, which I see a lot of people comment in and around standard, that people don't like playing standard because they think legacy items are stupid and they think it makes the game too easy. So this is and will be a symptom if an auction house enters into Path of Exile. It's at least hypothesized. I shouldn't say it will be. It has a good chance to be that people will feel like end game content simply gets trivialized and the challenge won't be so challenging. And that makes the game unfun because your ease of acquiring better gear, better currency, better items will be much faster. Your character progression is faster. It simply means that getting to end game content happens a lot faster, which makes it less challenging and it makes it unfun. Imagine if everyone had 10 mirrors drop for them each day. Just imagine that for a moment. I just want you to imagine that. I know I wrap up every single video hoping that today is the day that you get a mirror, but just imagine if the entire economy was predicated that every single day every person in Path of Exile got 10 mirrors to drop for them each day. The amount of perfect gear floating around would make the balance of the game wildly out of control. It would make the game unfun. There would be no challenge to it. And so the faster we make trading, the faster grinding gear games allows for trading to happen, the closer we get to this. I realize this is hyperbole. I realize this is pushing it too far. But the more closely we get to an auction house in terms of our mediator for trading, the closer this hyperbole, this awful example, actually comes to reality, where gear becomes OP all over the place and we begin trivializing all of the game's content, and it's simply not challenging, it's simply not fun. Thirdly, having to put the right amount of time, effort, and energy into a journey results in a better experience during that journey. It's not the destination, it's the journey getting there. And so the faster results you have and the faster journey you have getting to your destination, the less you enjoy the experience of getting there, the less you enjoy the experience of your character changing, your character progressing, your items changing. The less stories you have coming away about your character at this level, your character at that level, your character using a particular leveling weapon or a particularly good leveling rare. The less stories and the less memories we have of that. So how does the conversation go from here? Right? We've articulated why people want an auction house, why it might be good. We've talked about why it is that Grinding Gear Games has said, hey, we're not doing it. So what do we do from here? Well, GGG has made it clear they do not want to speed up player progression via trading any more than it is presently. GGG's also made it clear that they greatly fear player wealth disparity, aka a gap between the ultra wealthy and the common player. GGG has also made it clear that third-party sites and developers have greatly influenced the policies around trading in Path of Exile. For those of you that don't know this, again, I encourage you to go read this development trade manifesto from Chris that was posted in 2017. He actually articulates in there that trade in its inception, in its genesis, in its birth, as we now know it today in Path of Exile, it was not developed by Path of Exile themselves, by Grinding Gear Games themselves. And those of you that have played the game for more than a few years know that the official trade server and the official trade website is actually a relatively new thing, and that Grinding Gear Games only launched that official site after a ton of pressure and after realizing that trade websites weren't going to go away. Trade websites were originally a community creation, and they weren't necessarily supported by GGG, and GGG realized, hey, we can't stop this. There's nothing that we can do. Originally, in its genesis, and Chris talks about this in detail, people used to have to post on the forums, and so as people were posting on the forums, other clever, wonderful, awesome third-party programming people came along and said, okay, well, we're going to build programs that aggregate this data of people posting on the forums. And then other people said, okay, we're going to design some UI to make it more presentable and more searchable and more interactable. And then other people said, okay, we're going to take all that data and basically make it a database that's live and interactive. And then eventually GGG said, look, we're going to come out with our own website because you guys are doing such a great job of this. We at least want it to be on an official sponsored way. So GGG has made it clear that third-party sites and developers and us, players inside the community, have actually influenced the policies around trading in Path of Exile. So I hope that as we're having this conversation about the auction house, that this actually inspires some of us. If you want an auction house in Path of Exile, chances are, as a player and a contributing member of the community, you actually can be a part of the change that you want to see in this community, because other people have actually pushed for things to change in trading in and around Path of Exile and in and around the policies of Grinding Gear Games. It's a game where us players actually have an impact on how things look in the economic world of the game, and that is awesome. For me, that's one of the reasons why I stick around Path of Exile so long, because it's one of the games where we as players actually have agency and can change things with awesome, wonderful developer realities and dreams that become realities, like influencing trade. So, how does the conversation go from here? Continued? Well, we need to move the conversation beyond simply screeching, like those forum posts that we looked at, where people are just screeching, the auction house is good, or the auction house is bad. We need to move beyond that. Okay, so I'm encouraging you to do that. We need to move beyond simply screeching at each other, good or bad. Okay, we need to take into consideration Grinding Gear Games' stated goals and concerns for trade. We've got to actually address these things if we want to move forward in this conversation about the auction house. Suggestions need to be made, recognizing that they either interact and alter or honor Grinding Gear's previously stated goals about keeping trade slow and slowing down player progression, keeping trade frustrating and tedious rather than streamlined. We actually have to realize that our suggestions are either going to rub against and be in conflict with those motives and those goals, or they're going to somehow honor those goals and then change the methods of how we're reaching those goals. Fourthly, suggestions need to be made recognizing that they either alter or honor Grinding Gears Games' stated concerns about player retention. So if we just want to say, yeah, well, I don't care about all of this, Iron. I just want an auction house where I can go to and get my maps. I don't care about anything else. That's fine. You're not recognizing the concerns about player retention and the very real concern that the game in the long run could suffer because players could stop playing sooner. That means less Path of Exile, less awesome expansions for all of us. So just realize that as we're having this conversation. These are very, very serious things that actually change the way that the game moves forward. So I'm going to make some wild assertions, because why not? I'm going to make some wild assertions, hopefully taking those four things into consideration. We're going to try and keep those in the front of our mind rather than the back of our mind. So, first wild assertion. Grinding Gear Games has never wanted an auction house. It's never been on the slate. It's never been on the project development plan. It's never been on the roadmap. It's never been scheduled to be onboarded into the game. Grinding Gear Games has never said that. They've never said they want to do that. They've never claimed they want to do that. So if you ever read or hear or see anybody saying, yeah, well, back in beta, they said no. Unless somebody can cite it, right? Unless somebody can cite it with a link, Grinding Gear Games has never wanted an auction house to be a part of their game. Secondly, Grinding Gear Games has never wanted a trade site in the form that we have presently. So again, I hope this gives hope to some of you that want to change the nature of this conversation and that want to prove a point about what could actually improve trade. If Grinding Gear Games didn't want there to be a trade site in the way that we have now, but they have a trade site in the way that we have now, that could mean that for those of you that want an auction house, you should keep making good arguments and you should keep pushing forward your ideas, as well as recognizing that they may come into conflict and they may need to be bounced off of various ideas and fears that Grinding Gear Games has about trade. But if GGG can alter on the trade website, maybe they can alter on other things as well. So this is only present because players have searched forums and built third-party tools like PoE Ninja, like PoE Trade. If any quality of life buffs come to trade, we ought to expect some massive nerfs to drop rates. This is just, again, my own wild speculation, but I think it follows. So this may mean that Grinding Gear Games would have to change drop rates in various types of gameplay leagues, because balancing drop rates for softcore, hardcore trade leagues may vary depending on the player population base. So remember how we talked earlier about how, depending on taking into account player economic value of items, would mean adjusting drop rates, and that comes directly from Chris. That's where I'm pulling this from. We may actually then have to see pressure on the developer, and the onus then being on the developer, Grinding Gear Games, to then say, okay, well, we're going to balance this unique for this particular league to have this particular drop rate. That could be a nightmare for the developers, and it's just adding more things onto their plate that's taking away from their opportunity to be improving the vast array of other quality of life things that we all want to see improved in Path of Exile. They got to mess with drop rates all the time, and with each meta and with each economy and with each update and with each change, it would change the entire balancing structure of Path of Exile. That's just something that I think, again, I'm not stating this as a fact, it's a wild assertion, but I think as soon as you start messing with drop rates based on the economy, it changes the rest of the game and the way how they update and how they balance the rest of the game. Next, Grinding Gear Games would have to account for player migration from solo self-found with changed drop rates. So if you have to start messing with drop rates in trade leagues, that means that those drop rates may be different than solo self-found. But what about player migration? Right now we have player migration. At any point in time, if you're playing solo self-found, you can simply migrate to a trade league. So if you've got better if you've got better drop rates in solo self-found, then couldn't you just imagine players trying to abuse this and players trying to spam solo self-found and then moving over, essentially muling their goods from the league that has better drop rates in solo self-found and then bring them over into trade league to make a profit? Point is, I think there could be a lot of abuse here, right? That's the wild assertion. That's the bottom line wild assertion. There could be a lot of abuse here if there are nerfs and changes to drop rates based on the league. Look at what Grinding Gear Games has done recently with their Atlas balancing strategy. If you think I'm just totally off base here, I just would cite this as an example. So first off, if there's a popular map that's got a seamless layout with decent mob density, what GGG tends to do is they simply nerf mob density, right? They don't say, hey, we're going to rearrange the map or we're going to redo the tile set. A core part of Grinding Gear Games design philosophy is reusing material that they've used in the past. So they're not going to go back and redesign a layout. What they're going to do is simply hit the numbers of mobs that are present in the layout in order to try and change the meta that has surrounded that map. Well, you can see in the opposite scenario, when a map is popular and it's got a tough layout but a really, really high mob density, what they do is then move that layout around. This is also true with divination cards. They simply move that map around whenever they make a change to the Atlas. They change the tier, they change the zone level, they change all sorts of things that are easy to change numerically, where they don't actually have to go in and change many things based on the engine. So I think if GGG has done this for maps, they would certainly do this for items based on the economy. They're doing it for maps based on the economy. Why wouldn't they do it for items if they have to take an auction house and player speed of progression into account? I think that's another thing that would happen. So here are some biased opinions that are based on those wild assertions. So if you thought I was way off in my wild assertions, prepared for me to get even more wrong. So in a game that values acquiring loot, an action RPG that Path of Exile is, cheapening the route to the loot cheapens the game experience in its totality. That's just the reality of it. If it's easier to get loot, then the game across the board is easier, and the whole experience as a game becomes easier, and it cheapens the experience. I, and many of you, some of you, I don't know. I think probably many of you, but maybe only some of you. Many of you, maybe some of you, I don't know. Anyway, many of you would probably love an auction house as a way to further our economic motivations and curiosities in observing and participating in an auction-mediated market. I got to throw that out there. Like, yes, do I really love trading and do I love Bank of Exile? I do. And part of me really wants to see what Path of Exile would look like with an auction house. So those of you that are just like, oh, Iron, I've got my pitchfork, and you're all against the auction house. No, I would be really, really curious to see what it would do to PoE. But I think there's a lot of good reasons and good logic that actually say it would do a lot of bad things to PoE that would outweigh the good things. Grinding Gear Games is putting to use their authority for good use by keeping PoE a bit of a hassle within the trading realm. That's just where I've got to come down on. If they're right on player retention and if they're right on player speed of progression, then from Grinding Gear Games' perspective, the developers of the game that I really, really enjoy, I've got to at least give them this. They're using their authority well to make good decisions for the game over the long term, even if I don't enjoy that when I'm looking for a map or a particular item. PoE started out as a grind fest. It started out with high risk, high reward styles of gameplay. So we can't complain about power creep on items getting out of hand on the one hand, and the disparity between player in-game wealth, and also complain about demand for an auction house, which would further incentivize power creep from developers and would further distance the well-to-do from the casual commoner. Like, we can't have it all. We can't complain about power creep and how more in-game content gets more hard and how more rare unique mods become more powerful. We can't complain about all this stuff at the same time, right? We can't have faster trades because we need more powerful items, because we need to overcome more powerful bosses. Like, eventually the whole game just becomes much more of a power creep treadmill once there's an auction house that is introduced into this realm. That is 100% my biased opinion. Next, some of you will agree, I think. Many of you, some of you. Anyway, somebody will disagree as well. But we can all enjoy discourse together in the community by presenting our ideas and experiences without screeching auction house at each other, okay? We don't need to do that. So we can actually have civilized discussion. I totally realize that now that I've said that, at least a dozen of you are probably going to leave comments that just screech auction house. That's fine. You can troll and be funny that way. It'll be semi-ironic like the first 6 times. But I think we can actually have a genuine discourse over things that could potentially be benefited in Path of Exile from having an auction house, or things that potentially would not be benefited, would actually be harmed from the presence of an auction house. I think we can actually have that discussion. So, what do you think? Let's jump into that discussion. Leave us a comment down below. What are your opinions regarding an auction house in Path of Exile? Would an auction house bring about doom and gloom to PoE? Would an auction house provide a much-needed improvement to trading? Would an auction house be beneficial to most players or only to some select few? Leave us a comment down below. And as always, I hope you enjoyed our discussion. I'm going to enjoy reading all of your various comments. And I hope that today is a day that you trade for a Mirror of Calandra.